everyone, to today's Scaling with People podcast. I'm Guinevere Curry, your host and founder and CEO of Guide to HR. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership and culture, and I'm super excited to have Victoria Pelletier on the call with me today. Victoria, share a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I will try and condense it because I have a very, very full, personal and professional life. I'm a career-long business-to-business professional services executive. Although I've recently made a shift, I'm stepping into an executive role just this month, and we're here in the summer recording. Who knows when this will come out? But as the chief operating officer for a global green energy company, much more in the startup space, I stepped into my own first executive role at age 24. So a mere babe at that time, although I started in the work world at age 11 and took my first leadership role at 14, had much experience at that point. I was still fairly young. I was also a brand new mother as I stepped into that executive role, and I've had some incredible lessons along the way. I've also built and bought companies for myself, and not to mention a myriad of other M&A transactions for the companies and the clients that I've supported over the years. And then on the personal side, wife, mother to two children. I had them young, so I'm an empty nester, fitness fanatic, a foodie, a wine lover. Oh, and I now have a fur baby. He's filled up the house now that I'm an empty nester.
Cat, or some other animal.
A dog.
A dog. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a fur baby too. It's a cat. Well, awesome. Well, welcome. So tell me a little bit about your own leadership journey. I mean, starting at 14, wow, and then really COO at 24. What has your leadership journey been like?
It's a crazy evolution. And I became a people leader at 14 years old. I was the assistant manager of the shoe store that I worked at. And I remember at the time, there was some absolute disdain from some of the people that I was working with who wanted to work there longer than me, but were probably 15 or 20 years my senior. And I would give them some direction. And then when I stepped into that first executive role, I was the only female executive. I was the youngest by close to 2 decades. I also happen to be part of the queer community. I was married to a woman before now being married to my husband, but still proudly queer, and I have a trans child. But back at age 24, the fact that I felt like, one, I was the only in a multitude of fronts, and I was so young into this role. It was a 6,000 person private organization. I became the chief operating officer and led every function of that organization except for finance. And I'd come out of running large scale banking operations. So there's a lot I did know, and I was leading very large teams. But now all of a sudden, things like technology, HR, sales, all of that was reporting to me. And so I felt like I needed to show up in a way that I had learned in my short life, but still my working life, a little bit more of this kind of command and control, I don't like talking about masculine or feminine traits, but there tend to be some identified more so than others. And so I felt like I had this need to prove myself. I don't like imposter syndrome, but that's probably the best way to have described it back then. So I've been very effective at leading businesses, and I've gotten some great nicknames like the turnaround queen, right? I can take distressed businesses and make them perform really well, but I had one I was not so proud of. I found in sort of a few years, into my executive leadership journey, that I found out I was called the Iron Maiden. Right. And that was, I was, again, delivering strong business performance. A lot of that came with strong performance management of the team and also making some tough business decisions. But I never showed emotions. I never showed significant vulnerability. I also never showed much of my personal life and the vulnerability. I have overcome pretty extreme adversity, particularly in my youth. None of that would have come to the forefront because, again, I don't want anyone questioning me. And I even lied about my age, by the way. I lied. What woman lies? I made myself older initially. So I had to shift my own leadership because I'm that's not me. It's not really who I am, but perception is reality. And I really was showing up in a certain way. So my leadership had to evolve, to, be much more human. And I realized not only did the weight come off my shoulder when I could just be my authentic self and bring my whole self to the table, but the like rapport and relationships I built and that connection and trust with people changed so dramatically. It wasn't natural and super comfortable at first when I started doing it. It was baby steps. But then it's now just completely innate in who I am. And that's really changed how I am as a leader. And I'd say from Iron Maiden to my best friend has called me turtle, right? I still am very resilient, tough exterior, but I'm soft and marshmallowy on the inside. And I let that be seen. And now I've built a really strong followership of people who want to come as I make, company changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know we were talking earlier before we started the podcast that you are in the middle of writing your third book. So tell me a little bit more about the books you have written in this one that's coming up.
Yeah, I was approached by publishers a number of years ago, probably like 8 or 9 years ago, I think it was, to contribute to a book. So I co-authored the book. I was the opening chapter in one called "Unstoppable: Changemakers Who Dare to Make a Difference," and Unstoppable is one of the two hashtags I sign almost every social media post with. That's just my life's philosophy and mantra. So like it just felt like karma for me to, participate in that book. And then when I made a decision last year to leave my last employer, I don't do idle well. And so I made a decision to sit down and write a book. And I was debating between the two topics, the one that will be coming out around leadership and culture in the early fall, and the other on personal branding. Both of those are really, key and influential to the success I've had from a career standpoint. And I was seeing post-pandemic in particular, how much more companies were leveraging the social capital of their employees to become more influencers and very much, and not just in a consumer business where you want the, Insta or TikTok like social influencer. But again, I'm from a B2B environment. So the salespeople who are out there, like people want to do business with people they like and trust and therefore
Mhm.
want to do business with. And I saw people falling down and that. So I wrote the personal branding one first. There was also then an exodus, particularly from the technology world. So lots of people in career transition. So I, released that one first. But my heart, is so like poured out into the next one called Whole Human Leadership. Managing a modern workforce with purpose and profit. So I'm excited about it.
I love that. Yeah. And I feel like through COVID, now we're really past COVID now, but post COVID, it seems like that's definitely been a recurring theme that continues to show up in my conversations with people in when I'm working with different clients. And I'd love to get your take on what that really means. Like, what is it that you are trying to educate people on from this perspective?
I'm I'm hopeful. So I believe that the majority of readers of this book are likely already in leadership or they're aspiring leaders. I am hoping to teach people some of my failures and the lessons I learned from that so they can avoid them. So that's certainly why, I want to do it. But also, I've been very fortunate now to be leading very large workforces in a variety of different companies. I'm actually like your traditional like Gen Zer who moves every 2 or 3 years, even though I'm a millennial. But I've been doing that for a very long time, in large part because some of these M&A transactions, et cetera. And I one, leading these large teams, I've also been leading human capital focused businesses. And so I'm hosting people, the CHROs or the chief people officers and their teams to talk around workforce of the future. Although this isn't owned by the HR function, this is all
Mm-hmm.
leaders in the business.
Yep.
But to be talking about how much things have shifted. We're not talking about the future of work anymore. Future's here. How do you adapt to that? Not only in the way we look at skills in the workforce and, where to, do you upskill, people? Do you buy new talent? Do you build it? Like all of these different things, but also just the expectations of employees. And I hated the headlines that came out. They grabbed attention around the Great Resignation and quiet
Mm-hmm.
quitting. But the
Gotcha.
reality is that was the employee uprise to say we need something very different from our leaders today. They want to work for people they like, they trust. They want to work for people who align with their own values, the sense of purpose in the roles they have, and alignment to purpose and values of the company as well.
So what does that look like? I mean, when you're in there as a leader and you're right, it's not owned by HR, but a lot of times it's like HR go do this. It's like, okay, we can't do that in a vacuum. We need the executive team, the leaders on the same path with us, and we're just there to coach and drive. But we all got to get out of the car and help fill up the gas and the tires and clean the windows and all that good stuff. So what does that look like when you're coming into an org and you're trying to help implement this mindset? What's some of the maybe like one or two key things that you start to work on that listeners tonight could take away and start actually executing on tomorrow?
I use this one phrase pretty frequently, and I use it for a few different things, including personal branding, but and, also around one of the things I spend a lot of time on: diversity, equity, inclusion, but also when we think about leadership and culture, strategic intentionality. And by that, so there's this element of strategy that needs to start with being completely grounded in the baseline of where we sit today. And so from a business standpoint, for sure, that's financial performance of the business, and what strategies are we going to employ to get there. But when we think about the people themselves, it's also understanding the baseline of our workforce, not only the makeup from a demographics and diversity standpoint, but employee engagement, and looking to go after that in a variety of different ways, not just the annual survey that most people don't think is really anonymous, so they're not truthful. And so finding different ways to understand that baseline and then build strategies around that. Everything from the leadership that needs to happen, the training and development that needs to happen, to the leadership to evolve their styles, to align to the expectations of the workforce, to the inclusion piece, right? So I find there's a focus on bringing diverse talent through the door, but then nothing to create a strong sense of inclusion or belonging. And so they're running out the back as fast as they come in the front. And so how do you build with intention then programs that what policies, procedures, but also it's the language, actions, and behavior of our colleagues, and that starts with the leadership down. And so strategic intentionality, understanding baseline, all the facts and data that you can possibly have available to you, and building a strategy, and then living with intention and purpose in terms of how you follow that through. That's how I walk into an organization. It's just been like absorbing. Like I'm an avid people watcher. When I say I'm a wine and food lover, like when I travel places, I actually just want to sit on a patio outside and just observe what's going on around me. Exact same thing in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's leaders, but when a lot of people say leaders, a lot of people think the top leaders, but I actually recognize it as the leaders, the middle, right? The managers who are on the front line, who are leading the individual contributors, their employees, to execute on what your leadership or your executive team is looking for. And so empowering them is also another key factor. I feel like that's something that a lot of orgs kind of miss in regards to really helping educate those leaders and empowering them to be able to do their job, and also helping them, like, it's that group is the glue to an organization when it comes to people side. And
Yeah.
it's where they're the ones that they know what's going on with Bobby and Stacy and Nancy and Joe and whoever else is on the team, right? I don't know at the top. I mean, I know everyone's name, like to know everybody, but I'm not going to be able to say, oh yeah, Nancy just had a 2-year-old go and decide to do something, or I guess maybe a more appropriate example would be maybe a 10-year-old who decided to go get into become a ballerina, right? Like, so from your experience and working with other people leaders, what are some of the things that you see have been maybe like amiss in trying to help with that engagement and interaction and being the whole human leader, and what have you seen that's been working?
The miss I see, and sadly, I do think it's a generational difference. Like I said, when I entered the workforce, my experience was much more of the command and control, and it's top down and do not question. Like, this is the decision that's been made. Don't ask me why. Like, we're just marching forward. And so I still see that from those that are of that generation. Not everyone. I don't mean to sort of do broad blanket statement on that. So what I still see that existing, number one. Number two is the whole human leadership. Um, you need to, it can be uncomfortable, even if you're of a generation that's much more accustomed to, speaking more openly and being vulnerable. When you're put into, positions of leadership, again, I think you feel like you've got these pressures from all over coming to be vulnerable, to show the appropriate emotion, to share your own lived experience. Like that's uncomfortable. And so but I believe that if you do not lean into the discomfort, then, the growth doesn't come. And so I see, even for some of the more progressive leaders, that's where they kind of get stuck. And with that, there's so much change, that every you can't say it's unique to any particular industry, every function. When you think about, the shelf life of skills have dramatically reduced to what's has been until probably recently around 2 years. Now, when you think with the like technological advances with Gen AI and the likes of those things, that's going to, change even more rapidly. So there's much we need to do as leaders. And this is where we also do lean on the HR teams to help us with like talent development, what are recruitment, attraction strategies, all those things. But how do you manage that change? And for me, communication is the key in all of those. And that means being transparent to the extent you can. You cannot always be really open around everything at certain points of time. But that's even the message you should share. And so there's just this transparent communication that comes that builds trust, it builds credibility in the team. And sometimes that means saying, "Hey, I don't know what I don't know." And that's okay as well. And so again, I think, it's hard to say I don't know what I don't know, but I'm going to commit to go and get you the answer. Like that's the response, in that situation, and to be vulnerable, to be emotional. Those are, like I said, those are just things that we need to lean into. What gets left behind in a lot of the technology automation is the I don't like calling them soft skills, the human skills. What gets left behind, the stuff that doesn't get automated, is the complex situations where you need to problem solve and innovate and get things out of the box and often calm down customers and employees. And so again, that comes back to like communication and, how do you engage with other people? And so that's where I want to see us much more focused, and where I see the falling down of some leaders, where it stems from.
Yeah, I think communication is absolutely key. And it's not just communication, but how, when the words you use, it all makes it really like important to get this right. People definitely know how to. I'm a mathematician at heart. So words to me are like, yeah, it's a blue sky. No, 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 it's light blue with coral darker blue on the other. And it's like, okay, no, it's just a blue sky to me, right? So like that's one of the areas where I lean into my team and have help, because that is not my forte. But every word matters, and employees and your customers, your board, your shareholders, investors, they're all leaning on every word you say. So it is important to get the communication right.
Exactly.
So, as we're talking about employees and the engagement and interacting with them, I know as companies grow, you get from 100 people to 500 to thousands and tens of thousands, it can be very easy for employees to feel unheard or unseen. So, for the founders listening today and their smaller org, as they start to grow their headcount, what are some things that they could put in place or think about as they start to grow the headcount into the hundreds, into the thousands, that could help employees not go unseen?
I think, a lot comes back to, leadership and the conversations we have with people, and uh, and the creation of opportunity. And so I just think of like when I have one-on-ones with people, we're always talking a combination of, sure, there's updates. I'm the type who, when it comes to doing performance reviews, there's never a shock or surprise when it comes time to delivering what's usually an annual performance review. All they'll learn is what rating I gave them. The reality is nothing else about it is a surprise, because we're talking consistently. But I'm also in those meetings talking about, and trying to understand the individual more deeply, and also understanding about the desired path they would like to go on. And as we talked about skills, it's also recognizing, how do I understand the experience, both lived and personal experience, that they bring to the table that could help for a future. And I think about this horrible data, fact around women in particular do not apply for a promotion or a new job if they don't meet 9 or 10, or they don't believe they meet 9 or 10 out of the 10 skills listed. Men typically will apply when they have 5 or 6. So there's something that's holding them back. And I think it's incumbent upon the leader to see the potential that they bring to the table. But it's a very different type of conversation you need to be having. And my role as a leader is to help bridge the gap where I see potential, where I see propensity to learn, where I see maybe different industry or functional experience or some other lived experience that they bring that I just think would be so applicable to a different type of role within our organization. Then it's my job as the leader to try and help bridge that gap and build confidence, quite frankly. And so if we're not having a much more rich and full, wholesome human conversation with our employees, we don't get to that. And also around employees feeling that they have a voice. It's going back to creating an inclusive environment where people feel that they belong, and we've created a safe space for people to challenge. I've worked for some of the CEOs and some of the companies that I worked for surround themselves with yes people. They don't want people around them that are going to challenge. But I actually think we all get better with that different perspective. So I think we need to be creating an environment where employees at all levels, and you said like even those frontline supervisors, have such better insight around what's going on, much like the frontline employees. They're the ones talking to, in many cases, customers all day. And so creating that kind of safe space to allow them to use their voice as their power and give them a platform to share much more openly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times it seems like as generations have gone into the workplace, having tough conversations, challenging conversations is like, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. And it's like, when you talk about this of being like challenging, it doesn't have to be a tough conversation. It could literally just be like, hey, I don't understand. This seems like it would be XYZ, or I thought we would have gone in a different direction. Why are we going in this one? It's asking, it's wanting to learn more, bringing a different point of view. I agree with you. Like, having people around me that say yes all the time is not going to get me to grow as a human being and to help the environment and the team and the company I'm working with to be the best that it can be. I have an individual I work with where a lot of times, like, she's like, I don't agree with that. Like, what? Okay, tell me more. Why? Like, that's one thing I love. I learned from one of my L&D directors, amazing lady. She's like, tell me more. And so I'm like, oh, I got that in my head now. It's like, okay, how do you get more information from people? When you say tell me more, it's like you're really interested in what they have to say, their perspective, their experience, and you create a safe place because you're also saying, I want to know what's on your mind. I really am intrigued and want to hear what you have to say and value what you say. So, trick of the day, if you aren't asking people to tell me more when they're saying something, start that as a new way to communicate with people, for sure. Well, Victoria, there was a lot here, and I feel like I can't wait for your book to come out and read it myself. And I hope our listeners do the same, because I feel you have a lot of valuable insight and experience that you bring to the table. And HR professionals like myself appreciate working with you because you understand the value and that we're partners, that we're not the ones doing it all. So any last thoughts, words, tips, tricks you want to share to the audience today?
I will leave your audience and with my favorite quote. It's connected to some of what I said around like leaning into your discomfort. And it's by George Adair. And it says, everything you've ever wanted lives on the other side of fear.
Ooh, that is a great one.
I love it. Love it. I actually had like an image like that I loved of like someone leaping over a cliff, something anyways, with that put onto it. But I think for all of us in our career, as we're coaching others, get uncomfortable with discomfort. That's where like amazingness happens and your growth comes.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Victoria. Great quote to end on. And for the listeners, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.